Hello, everyone, and welcome to this masterclass. I'm Barbara Kyle, and I'm speaking to you from Ontario, Canada, from a small city called Guelph. In this masterclass, I'm going to talk to you about the 3 things that agents and publishers must see in the first 30 pages of your manuscript. Thank you very much for joining me right on time. I appreciate that. But I know that there are a lot of people joining in from different places, different time zones. So I'm just going to give it a minute to let everyone join in and get settled here. Before we do get started, I want to know just a little bit about you. I'd like to know where you're joining in from. Do you see on the bottom of your screen, there is a small dialog box, a little box called Q&A, question and answer. You can type into that box comments or questions. So right now, could you please just type in where you are? And I'd love to see. I'll be able to pull that up on my screen here. Good, we have Julie in Virginia. Kimberly says, hello. Debbie is in Lakewood, Ohio. We have here, just scrolling down, Colorado, Las Vegas. Linda is in Panama. Great. Hello, Linda. And we have someone from Spain. It's quite a bit later in Spain, so it's great to have you join us. Delaware, Florida. Here is Chicago and California. Kimberly is in St. Petersburg, Florida. We have Dallas, Texas, San Diego. Oh, this is wonderful. We're getting people from all across the continent here, and Spain, and Panama. Thank you for telling me. This is just wonderful to see where everyone is. Maryland, West Virginia, Idaho. Good, thank you very much. Oh, and here's someone from Sweden. Again, I'm delighted to have you join us, you folks in Europe, because it's quite a bit later for you there. Canada, welcome to a fellow Canuck. Good, thank you so much. I'm going to just close that now, but I really appreciate you telling me where you are. It's great to know that I'm speaking to everyone across the continent and into Europe. Just one more, sorry, no, that I'm not going to go on with that because I've already seen enough of where you're all joining in from. I just wanted to say I'll be glad to take your questions, but I will look at them at the end of this session, at the end of the masterclass. Whenever you are thinking of a question, it's great to type it into that Q&A box, kind of maybe just so you don't forget it as I'm going through my comments here today. And as I say, I'll get to some of your questions at the end of the session. And by the way, this masterclass is going to be about half an hour long. Good, so let's get started right away on the 3 things that agents and publishers want to see, really must see, in your first 30 pages. First of all, I want to make one thing really clear. There are no rules in writing. Every rule that has ever been proposed about writing has been broken by some writer somewhere to very good effect. So there are no rules in writing, but there are principles. Principles that have shaped the art of storytelling for centuries. A rule says you must do this, but a principle says this works, and it has worked through all of remembered time. So it behooves us as writers to be aware of these principles so that we can use them in order to create the most compelling stories we can. Years ago, when I was just starting to write seriously, my mentor was author Marian Fowler. And Marian used to say, there's only one rule in writing, thou shalt not bore. Good advice. Marian was the writer in residence at the local library in the small rural community where I used to live then. And she's the one who really got me started on my writing career by critiquing my very first short story. It was pretty bad, but Marian helped me, and I learned fast, and she helped me. I rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, as I'm sure many of you are doing with your own work. you rewrite a lot, until finally that story was good enough and it won a competition, which made me feel great. Since then, I have gone on to have 10 novels published by major New York publishers, and over 500,000 copies of my books have been sold throughout the world. But it all started with that very first short story. And that's why I'm so grateful that I had Marion as a mentor. I think all writers, I think every writer can use a mentor. And that's why I like to, as they say, pay it forward. So that's what we're doing today. Okay, let's look at the 3 things that agents and publishers, the 3 really crucial elements that they need to see, agents and publishers, in the first 30 pages of your manuscript. I'm going to just take a second to share my screen here with you. Good, so as I say, only one rule in writing: thou shalt not bore. Keep that in mind. Everything else is fair game. What I'm going to be telling you about other principles. The 3 things that agents and publishers must see in your first 30 pages, and here they are. Number 1, a clear, inciting incident. Number 2, a main character that we care about. And number 3, mastery of effective dialogue. I'll be giving you insights on all 3 of these elements, and here's why I call these crucial and essential. Agents and publishers are inundated with manuscripts, sadly. So they really want a story to captivate them immediately. And if it doesn't do that in the first few pages, they can just stop reading because they've got lots of other stuff they need to get to. I do not want that to happen to you. So that's why I'm going to tell you about these 3 things, and I just wanted you to understand why they're so important. Let's start with the all-important inciting incident. There's a Bruce Springsteen song called Dancing in the Dark, and there's a lyric in it: you can't start a fire without a spark. In any novel, there has to be an event that sparks the story to life, and this is called the inciting incident. I chose this image because it gives a wonderful sense of that feeling of anticipation at the start of a story. Now, this character that you're looking at, she might have just experienced the story's exciting incident, and she's starting out on her journey, or maybe she's just about to experience the inciting incident. The thing is, knowing where to start your story is vital, but it's also difficult. A lot of really new writers will start with long paragraphs, sometimes even pages of description about the characters, description about the setting, or they start with big chunks of backstory. Backstory, of course, is the events in a character's life up to the moment when the story begins. A book's opening is definitely not the place for backstory. And here's why. Readers cannot feel involved with a character until they see them in action. Now, when I say action, I don't mean characters run around with guns. I just mean that the character is engaged in something that matters to them right away. So whether you're writing a mystery, a romance, a thriller, sci-fi, a YA fantasy, whatever your genre, introduce your main character when something vital is already at stake for them. It doesn't have to be, world hanging in the balance stakes, but it does have to sort of seem like that to the character. It has to feel like that to them. For example, the opening paragraph of Maeve Binchy's novel, Scarlet Feather, introduces the main character, Kathy Scarlett, who has just opened a catering business, and she desperately wants to make a success of it. So on page 1, she's on her way to cater the big New Year's Eve party for her wealthy and powerful mother-in-law, who looks down on Kathy, who's the daughter of her maid. And Kathy is well aware of what she is up against. Her mother's antagonism can break her and her business. So success this night at this party is vital to Kathy. And that's on page 1 when she's heading out to that party. The point is the character is right away engaged in something that matters to her. And then the inciting incident of the whole book can occur. I really like that phrase, inciting incident, because it suggests the necessary spark that starts the story. An event incites the character to take some kind of action. And because the phrase implies action, we writers can't fool ourselves into thinking that backstory or description constitute an inciting incident. They don't. So, what does make an inciting incident? Well, here is a definition. The inciting incident is the event that throws your main character's world out of balance. What a character does to try to regain balance forms the story. A person's life can be, of course, horribly upset by a murder, or by a call to war, or by getting fired. But the event does not have to be a negative one. Someone's life can be definitely upset by winning the lottery, or getting married, or going on a date that changes their life. There was an author who lived some years ago who was really good at writing inciting incidents, and you might have heard of him. His name was William Shakespeare. In his play Hamlet, the inciting incident occurs in scene 4, which is pretty soon after the play starts, when Hamlet is astounded at seeing the ghost of his dead father. And the ghost of his father speaks to him. His father tells Hamlet that he was murdered by his own brother. That's Hamlet's Uncle Claudius. So this extraordinary event totally upsets the balance of Hamlet's life, inciting his desire to avenge his father's murder. The actions he takes in this quest to avenge his father is what the play is all about. Look at the inciting incident in the novel by Frank L. Baum, made into an iconic movie, The Wizard of Oz. The story begins, of course, with Dorothy living her normal life with her aunt and uncle on their Kansas farm. It's a very boring life in her eyes, when a tornado strikes the place, strikes the farm, and sweeps her away. That is, of course, the inciting incident, utterly upsetting the balance of Dorothy's life. And it incites her desire, her need, from the moment she arrives in the magical world of Oz, to get back home. And she takes actions constantly to try to do that. Look at the inciting incident in a much more recent, best-selling novel, also made into a movie, Gone Girl. In this noir thriller by Gillian Flynn, Nick Dunn discovers on the morning of his 5th wedding anniversary that his wife, Amy, has gone missing. And that event totally upsets the balance of Nick's life. And he takes actions right away to try to regain that balance. And here's another example. The Goldfinch, the Pulitzer Prize winning novel by Donna Tartt. I think it won the prize about 4 years ago. At this book's opening, teenager Theo Decker and his mother are in an art gallery in New York City, and they are caught in an explosion that kills her. That's not a spoiler because it happens pretty much right at the beginning of the book. And in that horrifying, absolutely disorienting moment of the explosion that totally upsets the balance of Theo's life, he grabs a painting off the wall. It's an action that will haunt him for years through all the pages of this great big story. Try to have the inciting incident of your story happen as close to the story's opening as possible. But don't rush it. It does not have to be in the first page or pages. It doesn't have to be in the first 10 pages even. The most important thing is to give your reader someone to care about right away, your main character. And then when the time is ripe, bring on the inciting incident that upsets the balance of your main character's life and incites them to take action. Write a powerful inciting incident, and it must follow as the night the day, that your character will lead you headlong into their conflict, into their world, and into a compelling story. Okay, the second essential element that needs to be in your first 30 pages is all about your story's main character. It is their story you're telling. Their struggle drives the narrative. So your goal is to create a character that your readers will care about. So how do you accomplish that? Well, how do you create an engaging hero or heroine, a person who causes the events of a stirring story? I believe that it all boils down to one crucial quality, and that is empathy. Empathy is what is at the core of this. It's about creating an emotional response in your reader, because emotion is how we understand things deeply, and it's how we remember things. It's how our brains work. We don't remember abstractions. We remember something because we feel it. I think that we human beings are not thinking creatures who can feel. We're feeling creatures who can think. We're just hardwired this way. So the most essential characteristic of your main character is that they elicit the reader's empathy. They don't necessarily have to elicit our sympathy. What's the difference? Well, sympathy means I feel for you, but empathy means I feel with you. I identify with you. Sympathetic can also mean likable, but empathetic means like me. It means that deep down in that person, even an unlikable person, the reader recognizes a core of shared humanity. So it's not necessarily about being likable. We empathize for all kinds of very personal reasons. Here is a really good example. Don Corleone, the mafia boss in Mario Puzo's novel, The Godfather, made into the iconic movie and its sequels. In The Godfather, Don Corleone is not a nice person. As a mafia boss, he bribes judges and he buys politicians. He has people murdered. And yet, we care about him. Why? It is because the author, Mario Puzo, the author of the novel, skillfully shows Don Corleone to us in ways that will make us care. At the book's very beginning, we see him as a devoted and loving father, a man to whom family is paramount. We instinctively warm to that. We can identify with that. Second, Puzo shows us that the Don uses violence only when he's pushed, after he's been hurt first. We instinctively kind of forgive him for that. And again, we can identify, hurt me and I'll strike back too. And third, we never see Don Corleone hurting anyone. He does all of his dark deeds off stage. So although we know intellectually, of course, that he uses violence, we don't see it, and so we don't feel it. Whereas we are shown very graphically the violence that the Don's enemies do to him and those he loves, like when his son Sonny, is gunned down. That we see in gory, graphic detail. And so we feel the Don's pain and his grief. We empathize. Another fine example of a character who's not especially likable, but definitely elicits our empathy, is Scarlett O'Hara, the heroine of Margaret Mitchell's Civil War saga, Gone with the Wind. This book has now lost favor because of its racist assumptions, and I think that's an important and necessary social development. But nevertheless, a study of the artistic creation of its heroine can still inspire us as writers on a purely technical level. So that's what I'm talking about here. When the book opens, Scarlett is a vain, spoiled, selfish girl. She's 16 years old. And yet she is someone that the reader comes to care quite deeply about. How does Margaret Mitchell, the author, accomplish that? Partly it's because we get to see Scarlett's passions so deeply. Even if we don't approve of her, we understand her. We get her being in love to the point almost of obsession, because, well, most of us have been in love. But right from the start, our empathy for Scarlett begins because other people, truly good people, feel real affection for Scarlett. Mammy likes her, Scarlett's father loves her, and so does her saintly mother. Even Melanie has warm feelings for Scarlett. So the reader kind of feels a natural human response. If other people, good people, like this girl, there must be something about her. But perhaps most important is that we feel along with Scarlett because she is such a forceful, willful person. There is not a moment in this great big saga in which this woman is passive. Scarlett inevitably takes action. Eventually, we get to know Scarlett almost as well as ourselves, and that creates the greatest empathy. But long before that, even when she is utterly selfish and scheming, we can't help admiring her just because she's so incredibly determined. Now, there are some ways that you can create instant empathy for your main character. And let me tell you about 5 of these instant ways. First of all, of the 5 ways to create immediate empathy for your main character, make her good at her job. Whether it's a music teacher or a spy, a Renaissance painter, a criminal lawyer, a butterfly collector, whatever, we all admire a person who does their job well. Number 2, give him a sense of humor. I don't mean he's a stand-up comic or even a guy who wisecracks all the time. I just mean he's someone who can smile about life. We all warm to such people or such characters. Number 3, make her the victim of undeserved misfortune. You know, she's fired in a corporate cutback, ridiculed for her appearance, or maybe she loses a loved one. Do you remember Stephen King's novel, Carrie? She was ridiculed at school, and she responded in an unforgettably scary way. Number 4, put him in physical jeopardy. You want to be careful with this one because you don't want to make him a passive victim. We may feel sorry for him, but to really engage us, to make us feel empathy, he's got to take some kind of action to get himself out of jeopardy. And number 5, give her everyday foibles and flaws. You know, she forgets people's names. She trips on the same step every day. Giving her everyday small foibles will just humanize her. All right, the third essential element of the first 30 pages is effective and dynamic dialogue. Dialogue has a kind of magic because in a novel, dialogue is the only instance where there is no barrier between the reader and the character. There's no interference from the author giving descriptions and explanations. There's just the character expressing their unique selves through their unique voice, exposing themselves almost by their words. That's why readers respond intensely to dialogue. It feels alive. And that's exactly why agents and publishers want to see effective dialogue in your first 30 pages. There are several dramatic functions of dialogue, and I'll just briefly give you 3 of the most important. The first dramatic function of dialogue is to move the story forward. And there are countless ways that dialogue does this. You know, a character might reveal information or admit something. They might incite another character to act. They might make accusations. They might lie. They might defend themselves or argue their reasons. They might distract their listener. The possibilities, of course, are endless. The point is that all stories are about conflict. And remember, conflict does not mean fighting. It just means problems. What problems does the character have? So all stories are about conflict. And that means that good dialogue will always add some degree of tension, whether minimal or moderate or extreme, depending on the scene you're writing. The second important dramatic function of dialogue is to establish relationships. People speak differently to different people. For example, if you were telling your 13-year-old niece about what you learned from this masterclass, you would use words very different than if you were telling a fellow writer. Relationships take on a unique life through dialogue. And knowing this, you can use passages of dialogue strategically to highlight characters' relationships. The third important function of dialogue is to illuminate a character's individuality, of course. And as writers, we have great fun with this always. The goal here is to create dialogue that is character specific. That is, every character speaks in their own unique way. They don't all sound alike. The vocabulary a person uses, the syntax of their speech, their grammar, all of it reveals a great deal about them. For example, the pedantic speech of an English professor is totally unlike the jargon of a kid living on the streets. I mean, look at just the different ways that people might express simple agreement. Somebody might say, yes. For another, it's cool, or whatever, or splendid notion, or you got that right. Those are all just ways of declaring agreement. And I'm sure you can think of many more. But each one reveals something unique about the person saying it. It's also effective to pepper your character's dialogue with idioms, to individualize them, words or phrases that are peculiar just to that person. For example, in John Irving's novel, The Cider House Rules, Dr. Larch has a favorite phrase that he often repeats to the orphan boys that he looks after. He says, "You kings of New England, you princes of Maine." Dr. Larch loves saying it, and the reader loves hearing it. Another example is the novel The Princess Bride by William Goldman, also made into a beloved movie. In the movie, the character played by Wallace Shawn, he's the guy at the very bottom of the three of them there in your screen. That character is always saying, "It's inconceivable." He has a bit of a lisp. And he says it so often that another character finally says, "I do not think you understand the meaning of that word." Idioms are always fun when a character repeats them. One more note about body language. One more note about dialogue is that body language is a living part of dialogue. By punctuating a sequence of dialogue with a character's body language, with their gestures, you can reveal a lot of their feelings. For example, a woman, instead of speaking, fidgets with her wedding ring, or a man rakes his hand through his hair, or a girl covers her mouth to hide a smile. Gestures like this, and of course, dozens and dozens of others, gestures give rhythm to a scene. They fill the silences between the characters' spoken lines, and this fine-tunes a scene's pacing. So those are the three essential elements that need to be in your first 30 pages to intrigue agents and publishers enough to read on with your manuscript. Let's just do a quick review. You want to establish your story's inciting incident. Second, you want to ensure that we care about your main character. That's through empathy. And third, enliven and enrich the action with dialogue. Good. Those are the three essential elements. I encourage you to have a look at my website, which is barbarakyle.com. And there you'll find lots more to help you on your writing journey, including there's a free list of what I consider to be the best books about writing. So have a look at barbarakyle.com. Now, I promised that I would look at your questions, and I see that there are quite a few. I don't know that I'll get to more than a few, but I will certainly have a look at these. I'm just going to get a little closer to my screen so I can see them, my poor old eyes. Okay, so here's the first question. Can we have two main characters? Both are likable. Absolutely, you can have two main characters. It's commonly done. Very often we'll see a book divided almost half and half between the point of view of one main character and the point of view of another main character. It's not uncommon, especially in romances where we want to see the female and the male. So absolutely you can. Nevertheless, when you are putting together your pitch for your story or your query that you're going to be writing to agents or publishers, I always recommend that you focus on just one of them, because it can be confusing when someone's quickly reading a pitch or hearing a pitch, at a conference. If we have more characters we have to think of quickly, and when we come to your story cold. So if you're pitching or writing a query, I'd recommend focusing on just one. You can certainly mention the other characters, of course, but I would say focus on just one, but certainly you can have more than one main character. What if you're trying to publish a collection of personal essays? That's really beyond my pay grade here. My focus for the master class is about writing fiction, specifically novels, but of course all of these principles work for short stories too, a collection of short stories, of course. For essays, which are nonfiction, you would really need to do some studying about what works in writing essays and nonfiction. A question, are idioms important for main characters? I did touch on putting idioms into the dialogue of your characters. So it's helpful and great if you can have a couple of idioms that they use, you know, phrases that they love to use and reuse. Readers love seeing a little red flag of that go up and recognizing it. But of course it's not, you know, to answer your question, it's not important, it's not essential. But if a character does use kind of idioms that they use over and over, it's great to use that, and readers love reading it. It's certainly not crucial, not in any way. What about writing a main character in memoir writing? Again, a memoir, of course, is nonfiction. However, I have certainly mentored several writers of memoirs, many of which have gotten published. And the way that I help memoir writers always is to think of it as just storytelling. And so all the principles of writing fiction apply absolutely the same to writing memoirs. Great memoirs will always do this. An inciting incident, the use of dialogue, a main character, that's yourself if you're writing a memoir, of course, that we can empathize with. All the principles apply in writing a memoir or fiction. Do these principles apply for writing children's picture books? I think they do. Obviously in, I was going to say sort of smaller amounts. Everything will be smaller, everything will be shorter in a children's book. But yeah, I think all the same principles apply. Storytelling is storytelling. And when you do it well, that's when the kid says, read it again every night. And then here we have a last note here. Thanks for holding this class. Well, thank you for saying so. You're very welcome. But our time really is up now. I'll just close that box. So I will say goodbye to you now. Thank you very much for joining me in this master class. Have a look at my website, barbarakyle.com. And I wish you absolutely all the best in your writing. So good luck with that. Bye-bye.